Throughout human history, there have been many marginalised groups, people that have been treated unfairly or persecuted, often for very trivial reasons. There's something about human nature that treats the other, or the outsider, worse than their own. I suppose this is a phenomenon seen throughout the animal kingdom. Animals favour their own kind over others, survival of the fittest. Human-to-human cruelty has been witnessed across all nations and across all cultures since the dawn of civilization. Understandably, marginalised groups have long sought to be treated fairly, to be treated with dignity and respect. They have been victimised for generations and have only ever wished to be treated the same as their fellow man. Fortunately, especially in recent times, many of these groups have achieved equality under the law, perhaps not in every jurisdiction, but in many. Life is good, right? Well, unfortunately, some groups are simply not satisfied with the result. To be fair, it isn't all members of these groups. Let's just say that some members of some groups are not satisfied with equality under the law. Proponents argue that despite their many legal victories, institutional or systemic discrimination still exists, and therefore more needs to be done to level the playing field. Equality under the law is no longer enough. Some of them actively want their historical oppressors to be punished in some way, some sort of intergenerational revenge. They want their persecutors to pay for their historical sins. In this video, I would like to discuss the tendency for some groups of individuals to go from being victimised to attaining equality to becoming the oppressors themselves. I don't want to pick on any particular group, that wouldn't be very fair. So in this video, we'll take a look at a fictional account of a group of historically marginalised people who look pretty much like you and me, except for one glaring difference. They have a supernumerary arm growing out of their head. Historically, they have colloquially been referred to as armheads, and this is their story. Throughout human history, armheads have made up approximately 2% of the world's population. Archaeological records show that they have been present on all continents across many different cultures. One thing that is universally consistent, however, is that historically, armheads have faced prejudice and discrimination. In the 1700s, for example, during the Age of Sail, the great seafaring nations travelled to distant lands collecting armheads as they went. At first, they convinced them to board voluntarily with promises of free food, shelter, and a better life. But in reality, it was a one-way ticket to a forced labour camp. Sure, they got their food and shelter, but in return they were forced to work out in the sweltering fields. And as a few of them quickly found out, they weren't free to leave. Around the 1860s, these nations finally came to their senses and made it illegal to hold an armhead against their will for the purposes of forced labour. All armheads are, and henceforward shall be free. However, old prejudices die hard, and up until the 1940s, armheads were still treated very poorly. They were basically forced to keep to themselves in their own communities. When they did venture out, they weren't allowed to go to restaurants or cinemas, and they had to use their own restrooms. Kids on the street would often shout out, "Hey, armhead, what's that hideous thing growing out of your head? Ha 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 ha!" In the 1950s, armheads were finally allowed to attend normal schools alongside regular children. Many friendships grew between the two different groups, as they were now allowed to socialise with one another. In 1962, something historical happened at the JFK International Airport in New York. At the time, there was an unwritten rule that normal folk would always board a plane first, and then armheads would board last and sit at the back of the plane. But one day, an armhead lady by the name of Stanetta McAlpine decided that she had enough of being treated like a second-class citizen and boarded the plane first. Shocked onlookers didn't know what to do and just watched her board the plane. Finally, police were called, and despite her not having broken any laws, she was arrested and charged for public nuisance. The story got out across the country, inspiring copycat incidents. More and more armheads were boarding planes before regular Americans, resulting in complete and utter chaos at airports. Airfares had to be increased to pay for the additional security costs. Due to this mass civil disobedience, in 1963, the Armhead Rebellion Movement, ARM, was formed. Its motto was simple: Armheads unite, Armheads rebel. Throughout the 1960s, ARM groups banded together with sympathetic regular Americans, colloquially referred to as roundheads or roundies, and would show up at restaurants and cinemas and the like and sit in all the available spaces. They would then request service and then would refuse to leave when denied service. In addition to creating disruptions and drawing unwanted publicity, this action caused economic hardship for the owners of these businesses as paying customers weren't able to enter. In 1968, New York State was the first state to legalise marriage between armheads and regular folk. Over the following years, this spread to other states and soon became federal law. Due to these changes, the number of armheads rose from about 2% of the population to 5% in a short space of time. In 1982, armheads finally achieved equality under the law. It was now illegal to discriminate against armheads for any reason. Armheads across America breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had finally achieved what they had been fighting for all these years. By 1985, many countries across the world had followed suit. Armheads everywhere were finally free. By 1986, despite having achieved equality, some armheads didn't feel quite right. They felt that the word armhead was being used in a derogatory way towards them and had negative historical connotations. For this reason, they pushed for the term armhead to be replaced with the more inclusive limb diverse terminology. The organisation was renamed to the Limb Diverse Arm Movement, or LDARM for short. By the late 80s, the term armhead fell out of favour and was now considered taboo. People referred to it as simply the A word, and a campaign was run to stop people from using it. However, some limb-diverse people, especially young folk, continued to use the derogatory term towards each other as a form of reclamation. "Yo, armhead, what's up? Just chillin', my armhead?" Of course, non-limb diverse people, roundheads, were socially forbidden from using such language. "Hey, roundy, what's up? All is good, armhead." "What the f*** did you just call me, you f***ing limbist?" Yes, anybody who disparagingly referred to a limb-diverse person was immediately labelled a limbist. During the 1990s, more and more companies were encouraging limb-diverse people to join their ranks to fight limbism. In 2003, the first limb-diverse governor, Governor Harold Dover, was elected in the state of Vermont. In 2006, limb-diverse people realised that there were no major hat companies that made hats to fit people in the LDARM community. Up until this point, limbs had to be uncomfortably tucked under people's hats. Through a successful nationwide campaign, hat companies finally started producing hats with armholes in them. Limb-diverse people could at last show off their head limbs with pride. In 2011, the first limb-diverse CEO was appointed to a Fortune 500 company. In 2019, 78-year-old comedian Ronnie Rembolo, known for his edgy style of comedy, got his first Netflix special, Silent T. Ronnie had been a huge supporter of limb-diverse people throughout his life, and was even one of the first men to marry a limb-diverse lady. In his recent Netflix special, he started with a fairly innocuous statement. "Back when I was a boy, the term armhead was a fairly neutral term. It certainly wasn't considered offensive." At that point, the crowd started booing. "He said the A word! Get him off stage! Boo!" Thousands of complaints were sent in by the limb-diverse community demanding that Ronnie's show be taken off the air. The following day, Netflix complied and cancelled Ronnie's $10 million contract. His book publisher pulled out at the last moment, and his limb-diverse wife left him, not because he said the A word, but because she was threatened by many of his angry fans. Ronnie died of natural causes the following year. In 2021, a politician from Nevada was interviewed about the recent spate in crime against limb-diverse people in the state. He replied, Here in Nevada, limb-diverse people will always be supported." It sounded fairly innocuous, but people started questioning his use of the word armhead. They started saying that he was actually about to use the A word, armhead, and pulled out at the last moment. This clip spread across the internet, and people actually convinced themselves that he was actually saying the A word on live television. This caused a riot to break out in downtown Carson City. The politician apologised the next day for causing any offence, but insisted that he wasn't trying to say the A word. But the protesters didn't buy it. They demanded his resignation, and he was forced to resign the following day. In 2022, it became common for limb-diverse people to be invited to schools to perform dance routines for the young students in the name of raising awareness of the limb-diverse community. These dances often involve the dancers swirling their head limbs around in a fairly suggestive way. Many parents complained that this was not appropriate for young children, but the parents' complaints often fell on deaf ears and were quietly ignored by the school boards. By 2023, more and more people were identifying as limb diverse, even though they didn't actually have a limb on their head. However, they believed that they should have been born with a limb and felt that it was their natural state of being. Consequently, I was added to the acronym to represent those people that identified as limb diverse. Colloquially, they were now known as LDI arms. By 2025, cranial limb attachment surgery had increased by a massive 2,000% since its introduction 1 year earlier. The LDI arm community had lobbied government to fully fund the procedure. People who identified as limb diverse were racing out to get arms attached to their heads. It was quite a dangerous procedure, and many people were left permanently injured or disabled. But the government was fully on board, allowing those over the age of 12 to have this controversial procedure. The government were convinced by the LDI arm movement that the procedure was vital in bringing about full equality in society. In 2026, it was found that 12% of the population now identified as limb diverse, up from 5%. In 2028, the first limb diverse president was elected to the United States. 48th US President Wilson J. Cooper had performed his limb attachment surgery 1 year prior and promised to finally and conclusively bring equality to limb diverse Americans. In 2029, it was found that due to the government's decisive actions, limb diverse people now had more and more positions of power in large companies. Despite only representing approximately 12% of the population, a national survey found that 52% of managers and company leaders were now limb diverse, or limb diverse identifying, a massive success. In 2030, psychologists identified a group of people who, although didn't have a limb on their head, they questioned whether they should, causing an identity conflict. Consequently, Q was added to the acronym to represent these people that questioned their lack of limb diversity. Colloquially, they were now known as LDIQ arms. In 2031, it was found that some people actually had a supernumerary leg on their heads instead of an arm. Although very rare, to be completely inclusive, the acronym was changed to LDIQL arm, with members being referred to as LDIQ leg arms. By 2033, 62% of politicians now identified as limb diverse and created many more laws to protect the rights of limb diverse people. In 2034, psychologists identified another form of limb diversity, supernumerary cranial phantom limb. It's a condition where the affected individual believes and receives sensory information from limbs growing out of their head that do not actually exist, nor have ever existed. The individual does not wish to attach a new limb, however they feel as if they have a limb attached to their head. Consequently, P was added to the acronym to represent those people that had phantom limbs growing from their head. Colloquially, they were now known as LDIQP leg arms. Due to the new, more inclusive definition, by 2035, the limb diverse community grew from 12% of the population to a staggering 27% of people who are now identifying as limb diverse. This was the most inclusive time in history. A 2037 report showed that despite only 27% of the population identifying as limb diverse, they now made up over 93% of professional employees. A remarkable 96% of university graduates were now limb diverse. By contrast, only 1% of blue-collar jobs were held by limb diverse people. This was a huge win for limb diversity. But despite this huge success, a strange phenomenon started to occur. In 2038, there was growing resentment towards the limb diverse community, even though they had achieved more equality than ever before. Normal folk were becoming agitated for some reason. By the way, in 2038, a plus symbol was added to the acronym to represent those who didn't fit the mainstream definition. For example, people who believed they had an extra limb growing inside their head that wasn't visible to others, or others those who believed that they had a limb on their head in a previous life, but no longer do. However, they still face discrimination because of it. Anyway, a plus symbol was added to represent these people. It was strange. Despite all this newfound equality, it was almost as if discrimination was worse than ever before. Actually, a survey conducted worldwide in 2039 found that 83% of roundheads had negative or very negative sentiment towards the LGBTQIARM+ community. More and more people actively despise our movement. But why? What is going on? We're their doctors, we're their lawyers, we're their politicians, we're their university professors. We are one of the most successful diversity groups in history. We've achieved astronomical levels of equality, where we are now more equal than anybody else in human history. Yet it begs the question, why do they still hate us?